search for outside of ourselves, they are already written within us. Imagination, presence, and spirituality, these aren't just lofty words. They are doorways for us, listeners. Doorways to unlocking a part of ourselves that might feel forgotten or even hidden. Now, welcome back, listeners, to the Mindful Living podcast. I'm your host, Sana, and for today's episode, we are not just talking about God as a distant idea. We are exploring what it means to discover God within ourselves through imagination and through the present moment. And my guest, he has walked many paths as an entrepreneur, a creator, and a seeker, from building businesses across industries to diving into the mysteries of existence. My guest has lived a life of curiosity, challenge, and as reinvention well. And together, we are going to reflect on what it truly means to unlock our highest potential and maybe even discover the divine in our everyday lives. So, listeners, meet my incredible guest, Trey Tijerina. So, Trey, welcome to the show, and I'm really, really excited for this conversation.
Likewise, Sana, it is a pleasure to be here with you and all of your listeners, and I look forward to unlocking a lot of stuff with you and them.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Trey, I mean, we have seen times and times that humans can, really work wonders through imagination. I mean, there have been novels, books, creations. Sometimes that imagination has gone to a kind of unforeseen extent. Now, when we talk about unlocking God in humans through imagination, what does that really mean to you? Like, are we creating God through imagination or simply revealing what's already there within us?
Big questions to start off, and the the answers the questions are so big that the answers must be digested bit by bit. And so one of the, existential questions that we as humans wrestle with is this God character, or a lot of people like to word it as the creator. So the question is, what created me in terms of humanity, and what created that which we are existing on, which would be the universe or the multiverse or Earth, the planets, the solar system, however you look at it. And so when I talk about these things, I kind of just like to come at them from the easiest angle possible, the easiest digestible angle possible, which is the creator. And so if we think about the creator power, we think about God. If God is that which put all of this together, God created all of this. So when I talk about God, I'm talking about God creator power. And so one of the things that I teach is the power of our imagination. Most of us are going through life as adults using our imagination for what might be idle fantasy, or maybe just the occasional daydreaming. But imagination is much more a part of our existence than just idle fantasy or daydreaming. And so, how I like to think about this is the circumstances in our life and life in general are not separate from your internal. The way that I like to think of it is the external is yourself pushed out. So if I look at it that way and I start questioning my circumstances, the way that I stay more in my creative power is I let go of the mind. And so when I talk about these things, sometimes it gets kind of foggy when we introduce the mind and all of these other terms. But essentially, the way that I think about it is God is the imagination and the subconscious that we have within inside of us. The imagination is what we use to access anything outside of the present moment. And also, the imagination is what we as humans were given so that we can continue at every second of the day to choose what state of being to live from. And so that's kind of, in a nutshell, that's the role that imagination plays as I see it. And as you're able to choose the state of being to live from, you ultimately then inform the universe, your external, what to give you or what to show you that proves that what you are is what you are. So let me unpack that. If your imagination, if we take a client that I've had before and we take her imagination, so she grew up as a child in a very unsafe environment, and
Mhm.
she consistently felt unsafe as a child, and the circumstances she kept running into was that she was unsafe and that her house and her home was unsafe, and it would continue and progressively get worse and worse. And
Mhm.
so when I worked with her one on one, I kept asking her, she remembered a few powerful stories, a few traumatic stories that she recounted. But when we really focused on it, it wasn't necessarily the actual events that were shaping how she was feeling. It was the constant feeling every day that went unchecked that she was embodying, that was actually creating her circumstances.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of like, I'm sure a lot of listeners have heard the law of attraction. Like attracts like. We know this in society as misery loves company, where if you're miserable or if you're feeling misery throughout the day, you're more likely to attract those things and people and circumstances in that state of being. It's the same thing that's applied on the positive side. If you assume a state of being that's more joyful and that's more open and more full of potential and possibility, then that's what the universe will reflect back to you. And so I guess what I'm trying to convey here, I know that I've been a little bit everywhere on this answer, but what I'm conveying here is that the imagination is the tool that we can actually use to assume a state of being. By assuming that state of being, we then broadcast what it is we're feeling and how we're feeling so that the universe can then give that back to us. And ultimately, in a nutshell, that is creator power its its very finest. And when I'm working with people to produce more desirable circumstances in their lives, they often have a hard time believing that they actually can manifest their own reality. They have a hard time believing that they actually have some sort of influence over their circumstances. And what I like to do is I like to point out that all of the undesirable circumstances that they exist in currently, or that they're battling or challenged with in their present, is actually manufactured by their internal. And when we're able to work through that and work into that, and I can show them that their negative beliefs or their limiting beliefs that they hold are the reason they're experiencing life as they know it, then they're like, wow, I guess I am manifesting all the time. It's just that I'm manifesting undesirable circumstances rather than the circumstances I actually want to be in and experience. And so this is a big answer to a really big idea, which is that your creator power, which is God, your creator power really is induced with imagination. And the fact that so many adults don't utilize their imagination outside of the idle fantasy and the daydreaming really shows why um there's so many people out in the world that feel very victimized, or they feel like they are just at the mercy of circumstances. And I'm here to tell people that that's just not the case.
Yeah, totally, totally. I mean, I know that's a very, very profound, very big question, and um, maybe initially it can be a bit hard to interpret that. But especially when you mentioned about the uh, the experiences with your client, I think that really made it very, very clear. Now, I just want to bring in a bit of a different perspective here, Trey. That um, now because sometimes let's say now we have different interpretations of God,
Mhm.
um not just as a creator, but let's say someone who has the power to control everything, to sometimes we see that I'm the savior here, I'm here to save everyone. Uh, it's a very kind of a bit of a negative point that I'm going to make. Some
Mhm.
because it can be really kind of forced upon. The imagination can be interpreted in a very different way. Sometimes it can be very tricky to handle that for your people around that person. I mean, have you encountered any skepticism around this idea?
Well, yeah, totally. And skepticism originates from the programming. The there's very deep programming that we as humans accept as true, but when we really challenge it from the framework that I've introduced, it kind of starts to fade away. And so one of those examples is what I'll tell you here. We have
Mhm.
been programmed, most of us have been programmed as humans to accept that our desires are only on the other side of struggle, sacrifice, effort, and what have you.
Mm,
The the truth is that our desires do not have to be on the other side of all of those things. However, what we've accepted as true is that our desires are things that we must sacrifice and put struggle into to make happen. That's where we get the hustler's mentality. That's where we get the hard work, all of those kind of things, the grind and the grit and all of that other stuff.
mhm,
And I want to kind of introduce an idea where, some people might be like, well, how else could I get the things that I want without doing those kind of things? And so I want to introduce the idea of probability versus possibility. And and this is kind of what I was speaking to earlier about the mind. So
mhm,
the mind is where all the programming exists. The mind is where all the stories are. The mind is where we accept the stories as true. The mind is where we like to think imagination is kind of the playground. It is, but it's not also. The mind, it's its job here is to probabilitize the world around us. The mind and our experience with the mind is to create certainty or a certain level of certainty in our experience. It is to anticipate the future or anticipate things going on in the present. The mind is, again, attempting to put form to a chaotic and unpredictable experience, which is life. And
mhm,
so the mind, how I see it, is probability. We're probabilitizing our experience in the world. And that's also where it falls into the programming where it's probable that if I work hard 7 days a week, that I'm going to have the paycheck or the money that I want at the end of the week. That is probable, okay? And that is where the programming comes in. But I invite listeners and yourself to entertain the idea that actually our desires do not have to be on the other side of all of those things. In fact, our desires are already ours in consciousness. And let me explain that because sometimes that idea goes over people's head. So,
mm,
in truth, time as we kind of understand it as humans it isn't really what we think it is. Time, whether it's the past or the future, speaking specifically, is only
mhm,
accessed through your imagination. So when you recount a memory, no matter how you look at it, if the brain is doing whatever physiologically, when you are thinking about a memory, you're using that access via imagination.
Yeah.
Same thing goes to the future. If you are anticipating a conversation you must have, if you are thinking about next week's softball game, if you're thinking about something in the future, you're accessing the future using your imagination.
True.
And so understanding that the past and the future only exist in imagination, then we realize that the only true time is right here in the present moment. And so right here in this present moment, I have every free will to choose internally my emotional state, which ultimately is the state of being that I live from. It's also what I accept as true, my beliefs and my thoughts. And so, again, we're using imagination in the present time to assume a state of being that reflects how I want to feel. And the reason it's reflecting how I want to feel is because part of the trick of manifestation is to embody the feeling of the wish fulfilled. So if your wish
Mm.
is to, be financially abundant or financially free, then you would assume the feeling as if you're financially free. So that would probably include, oh, I feel expansive. I feel free. I feel like time is on my side. I feel lucky. I feel all of these things that would come with financial abundance and financial freedom. And so the trick to manifestation is to embody and assume that state of being so much so that you feel your imaginary state more than your current circumstances. Because what the mind also does is the mind likes to place permanence around our circumstances. It likes to trick us into believing that our circumstances are permanent. In fact, our circumstances are not permanent, they're fluid, and they're totally fluid and responsive to our internal state of being. So let me go back to the mind of potential and possibility versus probability. When you, as a human, can understand what the mind is doing, and you can choose to live more in possibility instead of probability, you are getting closer to God. And so, what I mean by that is, let's assume that I'm poor and I have no money and I have no house and no car. If I use my imagination to assume to assume the desired state, that I feel like I have a car. I feel the freedom of being able to drive. I also feel the financial security of having a job and having a roof over my head. That individual, what I would do is I would train that individual to use their imagination so that they can feel the reality of their imagination more than they feel the reality of their current circumstances. Because modern science is actually telling us and informing us that the brain doesn't know the difference between an actual lived experience and an experience that you live in imagination with. It's
Mm.
almost the same way that you can feel when you have a bad dream, or when you have a dream and you're unconscious, right? You're not actually experiencing it in the conscious. When you're having a dream, you can still feel as if the dream was real. You can still feel the sadness, feel the pain, feel the joy, whatever it is. And so that state of consciousness, that state of being felt more real to you than what it felt like to sleep in your bed. And so that's really the trick and the secret to manifestation is the feeling of the imagination and linking the thoughts and the feeling and all of those things together to then ultimately signal to the universe what to give you. And so again, the trick is to live in pure possibility instead of probability. And you do that with tools and techniques like mindfulness, like realizing that you're in the present moment forever now, and realizing if I'm obsessing over the future or I'm depressed in the past, that I can learn tools and techniques to relate to the past or relate to the future in a more healthy way and give it permission and also leave it leave it be because I'm here in the moment. That's how you're able to kind of practice more mindfulness to get closer to more possibility rather than probability, which is mind. I hope all that makes sense.
No, definitely it does. Definitely it does, Trey. And I really, really loved how you kind of um, connected the ties, every kind of concept that you explained so beautifully and with such a clarity, because it is difficult, because we are talking about um, probability versus possibility. We are talking about manifesting, we are talking about unlocking the god within us, and then we're also talking about the fact, the research that has been done, that our mind doesn't kind of it doesn't know how to differentiate between a lived experience and some kind of experience that we may have when we are dreaming or we are having a nightmare. So I really loved that flow. And now, as you mentioned about mindfulness, Trian, because you have been working with a lot of entrepreneurs, and you're also an entrepreneur yourself. Um, have you encountered any kind of thought or belief around mindfulness that it kind of um, forces us to be just in present and not get prepared for what can be a probability in future or a possibility, like having backup options, being ready for unforeseen circumstances which may happen in future.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So really what it boils down to is a few core emotions or feelings, and I'll name them. It's fear, it's anxiety, and it's resistance. And
Mhm.
so those things I bring up because the example that you brought up as far as preparing for the future, and
Mhm.
I'll invite you to kind of entertain the idea that what future are you preparing for? The future according to who? And
Mm.
it's, it's again, there's the mind putting form, probabilitizing what could happen in the future. And
Uh-huh.
so, I want to also invite you to look at this example, and I'll go back to the original question. Let's take someone, because I know that drugs and addiction are a very prominent topic of conversation here in the United States, but
Mhm.
specifically just substance abuse, we could categorize it as. If you have a family member in your family and they abuse substances, let's just say alcohol for this example. Let's say you have an
Mhm.
alcoholic in the family, and every Thanksgiving, you guys get together, the whole family gets together, and every single year after the alcoholic realized and everyone realizes that the alcoholic's an alcoholic, every single year after that, you guys get together and every one of the family hides the liquor, they hide the beer, they treat the alcoholic as if he's an alcoholic. They continue to prove and show the alcoholic that the alcoholic has a problem. So what they're doing is, although they're consciously and intentionally wanting to make the experience easier for the alcoholic of the family, what they don't notice and what they don't realize is they're subconsciously signaling messages to that alcoholic that he's still an alcoholic and that they don't believe he's able to show up in any other way other than an alcoholic. And so the alcoholic continues to have problems. The reason I bring this up is because one thing that we as humans do that we really can do a better job at is stop putting people in boxes. And it's not just people, it's also any kind of relationship we have outside of ourselves by putting those things in boxes. But let's take people, for example, because it's the easiest. If we put our alcoholic uncle in the box of an alcoholic uncle, he has no other choice but to show up as that alcoholic uncle, especially in our experience as we're putting him in that box. However, that's probabilitizing. However, if we live more in possibility, then we can realize that, hey, we can show up in this moment today. We're grateful for this moment we have today. And we
Mhm.
also are open to the possibility that our family members, no matter who they are, can show up in our lives in any way possible. And just having that mentality, but also living from that state of being where you're open to possibilities will subconsciously signal to the alcoholic uncle that he actually doesn't have to be who they think he is showing up. And so my main point is we have to be careful as humans of what we're subconsciously and subliminally messaging to others outside of us and to the universe outside of us. And for example, if we're worried about the future, we're signaling to the universe that we don't trust that it has our best interest in mind. We also are signaling to our subconscious that we don't trust that we can handle whatever situation arises, that we feel at some point inadequate or we feel at some level not good enough to handle whatever moments come up in the future. And so I would argue that the individual that is wanting to stay prepared for the future, or that wants a backup plan, is doing so off of pure programming. Probably because their mother or their father told them that that's the way to life. And if you
Mhm.
subconsciously signal to life that you'll need a plan B, what you're also signaling is that the plan A that life has for you is never good enough. Or you're signaling to it that there has to be something wrong with this scenario so that I do have a plan B, a plan C, and plan D. And so that's kind of, again, it goes back to the programming. It's very, very deep, and for a lot of people it's super, super difficult to discern between programming that they prefer and programming that really has limitations on their experience in the world. And I would say if you're worried about the future, then you're limited and you're limiting yourself for how much you can exist in the present. And equally so, if you're depressed in the past and unable to accept things in the past, then you are equally abandoning yourself in the present and not showing up for yourself in the present. And that's where mindfulness comes in.
Yeah, definitely. That's hardening. That's hardening, Trey. Wow, that was such a brilliant way to explain this, Trey. And oh my goodness. Okay, so if our listeners they would like to connect with you, what would be the best way?
I am on social media on a few platforms. You can find me with the at YPayTrey, and that's all spelled out WHYPAYTREY. And then if anybody is interested in conversing with me over these topics or would like to get unstuck or look at life in a different way where there's more possibility and more freedom, then please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can email me directly at, again, ypaytreymedia@gmail.com, and I will be more than happy to work with you and see how I can help. And that's kind of what I live for is unlocking that deep level of freedom for myself and for others around me and getting to my highest self.
Beautiful, wonderful. I'll make sure to have all the links in the show notes. And Trey, this was really such an enlightening. I think it's like an unfolding of you know our thoughts. Um, and it's such a profound discussion, and I'm very confident that this will really kind of push our listeners to dare to imagine, um, hope that they stay in present and they discover the God within themselves, maybe in the most ordinary and extraordinary moments of their lives. So thank you so much, Trey, for bringing this up.
And any listener out there that feels what I'm saying and that will leave this podcast going into the world attempting to relate to what I'm saying, my last piece of advice would be this. At any point that you find in your experience that you are using mind to predict or to put probability or to anticipate or to guess or anything of the sort, to put form to, if you're using mind to put form to your experience, then you are not making way and allowing for pure possibility and God to work in your life. And the last thing I'll say is that the difference between pure probability and pure possibility is miracles. That is the difference. When you live in pure possibility, you make way and allow for miracles to work in your life, for circumstances and for life to rearrange themselves in a way that gives you your desires because you've already assumed that they are yours in consciousness. So that's my last piece of advice.
That's a beautiful one, and really, really hopeful. And with this, listeners, I conclude this conversation, this episode on the mindful living. Um, you know, unlocking God in ourselves isn't about reaching upward to some distant power. It is about turning inward with courage, imagination, and presence. And perhaps it is about also questioning, like, where does humility meet empowerment? Where does stillness meet disruption? And where does the self meet the divine? With this, thank you to everyone for tuning into this episode of The Mindful Living. Until then, next time, keep living mindfully. Thank you.